Hello everybody, this is Michael Haupt and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to the next session in our Purpose Economy Telesummit. And today we're in conversation with NICOLA Robins. So it's my great pleasure to introduce NICOLA Robins, who's the co-founder of Insight, a global advisory network based here in South Africa, helping companies build competitiveness by delivering social value. NICOLA, it's an absolute pleasure to have you with us today.
Thanks, Michael. Great to join you.
Great. So, NICOLA is also a certified shared value practitioner. She has provided strategy and coaching services to organizations across most sectors in Africa, Middle East, Australia, and China. She integrates approaches from complexity theory, traditional African knowledge, and business strategy, and she works with leaders seeking meaningful change. So here to lead the conversation with NICOLA is the founder and CEO of Proudly for Purpose, Magna Rotenbach.
Thank you, Michael. Michael is my co-host for the Telesummit, and he is the CEO and co-founder of the Brain Barn, which provides visibility, impact, and business services for thought leaders. And NICOLA, thanks for being with us today to discuss a topic central to the purpose economy. Purpose as a driver of value, innovation, and competitiveness.
Hi, Magna. Thanks for the invitation. It's great to be here with you.
NICOLA, for many decades, profit was seen as the ultimate driver for business success. Leaders globally are starting to reach consensus now that purpose has a huge role to play in driving value, innovation, and competitiveness. Why do you see them coming together at this point?
Magna, they are coming together. One of the reasons is that we're seeing an intersection of three quite interrelated trends at this point, and they're really big trends. On the one hand, we're seeing a decline in some of the natural resources available to us. So things like soil fertility, water availability, the carbon absorptive capacity of the atmosphere. These are absolutely critical to our business space, and these are declining slowly over time. At the same time, the second trend we're seeing is an increase in people's needs for that, needs for those resources, an increase in social demand. And the third trend interacting there is the reality of an increase in disparity between the rich and poor. So if you take these three trends together, they're beginning to reframe the competitive playing field for businesses and for commerce. And Bob Johansen of the Institute for the Future calls it a VUCA world. V stands for volatile, U for uncertain, C for complex, and A for ambiguous. So this is the VUCA world that we're being in, and that we're living in, and that we're trading in. And in this space, in this new context, what you're finding and what people are finding is that in order to continue to make profits, there needs to be a social angle or a social purpose driving some of their energy in that space. And that's really what's bringing these things together, and it's really introducing a concept called shared value, which is beginning to inform the way business thinks about competitiveness.
And what exactly do you mean by shared value?
Well, in a nutshell, it's about innovation that drives social value at scale as a business proposition. And that's really coming together as a business strategy. Social, or what do you say, shared value is not really about corporate responsibility on its own. It's not really about social investment or doing good. It's absolutely core to the business. And that's what's really underpinning it. And what we're finding is that organizations are seeing the need to bring these two things together and really rethink their strategy. And what's core to it and what's core to shared value is that business needs to make a really conscious choice about how they want to compete in the space. The question they ask themselves is, do they want to differentiate their brand? And that might be an investor brand or it might be a consumer brand, but do they want to differentiate their brand as delivering social value? And is there an opportunity for them to do that? And that choice really takes them into the space.
And so companies are really making this choice.
Yeah, they're making this choice, but to be honest, a lot of these companies are making this choice unconsciously. They're not systematically considering all the options, and they're not systematically considering the risks and the opportunities for themselves in doing that. So, I mean, if you look at the choice, on the one hand, you'll say, well, no, I don't think I want to differentiate my brand as being socially preferable, which is a fine choice to make, and many organizations do make that. And in that context, what you'll simply do is you'll recognize that some of these social drivers, these social challenges, are really just going to be a risk radar for your company. You might want to do some CSI on the side to help your reputation. You might want to drive some efficiency to lower your costs. But you're not fundamentally going to mess with your business model. You're not going to look at how you create value. You're really going to protect how you've always created it all along. So that's the one choice. On the other side, organizations can go for the other option and say, well, actually, I think there is an opportunity for me to differentiate in this space. And what they've done is they've said, let's look at some of these social challenges and realize that they may be really impacting the competitive playing field. It really starts to touch in on competitive issues. And they're going to make a completely different choice, and that's going to require different kinds of competencies and different kinds of leadership.
And if a company wants to go into this shared value space, which requires obviously a clear social purpose, how would they move from strategic intent to actually driving the social innovations that are needed?
Well, that is the million-dollar question. But in a sense, this is not really rocket science. It is simply about recognizing that there are specific ways you've got to re-look at your business model and at the competitive playing field. So one area or one pathway into the space for an organization is to take a step back and look at your value chain through the social lens, through the social and environmental perspective. And what you're looking for is you're trying to find radical efficiencies from an environmental perspective, but equally radical access for those who have perhaps not accessed the value chain before, those who are perhaps in the base of the pyramid, whose businesses aren't as developed as yours may be. So you're driving access and efficiency. And a great example there is actually SAB Miller. If you look at what SAB Miller's done in Africa, they've really rethought their input products. So they've looked at their source, their raw materials, and they've shifted into cassava, which is very available in Africa. Secondly, they've completely reoriented their sourcing strategy so that they can source product, raw materials, from thousands of small emerging market farmers. Now put that together and you get a radical change in the value chain. And that's the one pathway. It's not only that way. Another way organizations are doing this is to look at their products and to explore new markets, particularly those markets that deliver to the underserved population, those who perhaps, again, have not had access to these products before. A lot of that's taking place in the ICT sector, the mobile sector, but a really great example here would be Discovery. If you look at Discovery's Vitality product, okay, not necessarily targeting the low-income sector, but if you look at the nature of Vitality in terms of health insurance, what they're doing is recognizing the ability to deliver and change the product to deliver increased health, and this is measurable health increases, at the same time as improving their actuarial dynamics. So as a company, they're doing really well, but they're also measurably improving the health of people who are part of their Discovery Vitality network. Again, that's a really good example of organizations coming together to relook at products. And the third one we call developmental partnerships. And this is where organizations partner with other companies, with NGOs, with governments, with multinational organizations to really try and develop the full sector over time. And you might find this taking a little bit longer in terms of their hurdle rates and returns on investment. But certainly there's some great partnerships taking place. So locally, we could talk to an organization like TFG, which is the Foschini Group. They've got a lot of retail brands under the group. And what they're doing is really partnering to drive localization, to drive their ability to source product locally in South Africa instead of sourcing primarily in Bangladesh or China or overseas. And really this localization process is in a partnership with the DTI, the Department of Trade and Industry. It's a good example of a developmental partnership. So those are really the three ways that organizations are looking to change, get into the innovation space, and really rethink their business model.
So it's clear that it is about strategy, and that it's very core to how the business actually creates value.
Exactly, Martin. I mean, I'm not in any way knocking being responsible and being good, and I certainly think that corporate social investment is a good thing. But we're not talking here about charity. We're talking about doing business in a way that really makes sense in this VUCA world, this world that's very volatile, very uncertain. And if you look at TFG, you know, the reason for them localizing and the reason for them driving the creation of local manufacturing capacity in their value chain is not simply because they want to be nice or they want to be good. The reason is that they need to stay competitive in relation to the lead times of getting product from the manufacturing floor onto the shelves in their retail shops. So they need to stay competitive with companies like Zara, where they've got very, very short lead times. And this becomes a critical driver to their business. Fortunately, and this is where shared value or social purpose comes together with profit, it equally delivers in relation to a pressing social need to generate employment capacity in South Africa.
And Nicola, who do you see driving this conscious link between purpose and profitability? Is it coming from customers, investors, or companies, or perhaps a combination of those?
It is coming from all three of them, but not in equal measure. So on the customer side, I think there is a degree to which customers care about the extent to which the product they buy or the service they purchase addresses social challenges. But the fact is many customers are motivated primarily by price and quality. They also will tend, and surveys have shown us, customers will tend to say they care more than actually being prepared to pay any kind of premium for a product that does, you know, cool stuff in relation to social issues. But also, I think in reality, a lot of customers are getting a bit confused by a plethora of eco labels and fair trade labels, all sorts of labels that tell them that they should buy this product preferentially to another one. So I think while customers may have good intent, they're not going to be a powerful driver. And similarly too with investors, what we're seeing on the investor side is a lot of developing responsible investment initiatives. And these initiatives purport to act on behalf of trillions of investor dollars literally around the world, which sounds really fantastic. We think, wow, the investors are really into changing the space, and it seems like investors are really into social purpose. But when you ask companies whether investors are actually asking them challenging questions in the space, in their roadshows, in their meetings with companies, they're not. Investors are simply not picking up on this issue. And so we are certainly not holding our breath on this. So really, Magna, the reality is that companies are actually driving this ahead of investor sentiment. And within companies themselves, it's typically the CEO. It's typically a senior person, somebody who has a vision, who really is at the coalface and who understands, perhaps differently to an investor, that the social and environmental pressures are now literally changing and shifting the competitive playing field. So that's where it's coming from.
But that's really good news in a sense. So you see South African CEOs pushing for this perspective.
We do, and it is good news because obviously the CEOs, well, he or she would really have the capacity to influence their organization. And are South African CEOs pushing for it? Yes, some of them are, and we're typically seeing the leading brands in the space, large companies moving into this with a very open question around how they can create shared value. So again, if we look at Discovery, it would be Adrian Gore saying, you know, how can we make this organization a force for social good? It is literally a question that he asks. If you look at Discovery's core purpose, they don't say our core purpose is to make bucket loads of cash. Well, they're making lots of cash, but that isn't how they define their core purpose. Their core purpose is to make people healthier. And what I can say about Discovery is you can walk into any Discovery building and ask one of their 8,000 employees around the world and ask them their core purpose, and they'll tell you the same thing. So it's certainly in their culture, and it's very real to them. Similarly, an interesting company in Oceania. Now, obviously, they're doing a lot of fishing, and it's an issue from the point of view of fishing stocks in the future. But the core purpose for Oceania, and this is coming from their CEO, Francois Katzel, he doesn't say we're into excellence in fishing, which is kind of the classic core purpose statement. No, what he's thinking about is how can we provide affordable protein to people in Africa into the future. So the move is around affordability. The move is around protein, which is fundamental to people's health. Equally, in organizations like Anglo American, you've got Mark Kutufani or Ben Magara at Lonman, really trying to get their heads around what shared value means in the mining sector. And obviously that's a really tough one right now, but there's no doubt that this is what these CEOs are thinking of. And so I think it is positive. Incidentally, they don't necessarily always get supported by their boards and by their investors on this, or even their full exec team. But quite often the CEO sees this and understands this message ahead of the rest of his team or her team.
And Nicola, in a way, we can see something like Black economic empowerment also driving a social purpose. Do you see BEE as having achieved shared value?
You know, I think the intention around BEE is really good. I think we still need it. And I think you're right. There is a connection between what BEE sets out to do and what shared value is trying to achieve. At the same time, I think that BEE is probably going to go down as a bit of a missed opportunity when it comes to shared value. And the reason for it is this, is overnight, with a single piece of legislation, government changed shared value and the prospect of shared value from being an innovation driver into a compliance driver. It created a whole set of boxes for organizations to tick, which has its uses, but what it doesn't do is it doesn't ignite the creative juices of managers, of executives. In some respects, what it does, it flatlines energy with respect to creativity and innovation. And that's really going to be the struggle from a BEE point of view. What happens then is you see the preferential procurement initiatives, the enterprise development initiatives, all very positive, but they tend to be marginalized from the core business, from the business model itself. So you're seeing people doing enterprise development in terms of car washing and taking staff home in taxis, you know, canteen services, which is great, and it's really great, but it's not really getting to the core of the business, and therefore it will always be limited in terms of scale. And I think that challenge is huge, and I'm not really seeing this being addressed in the new BEE legislation coming forward. So it's a pity, but hopefully it's something that will develop more over time.
And then if the legislation doesn't cut it, how should government then be driving social purpose and shared value? What is the alternative?
Well, in addition, really, more than an alternative, what I think another huge opportunity for government is in the state-owned enterprises. These are huge organizations, and I'm talking about the likes of Transnet, I'm talking about Eskom, I'm talking about the PIC, I'm talking about the Land Bank. These organizations should really be at the forefront of the developmental state. And as such, they should be absolute bastions of shared value. They should be really hallmarks of delivering both financial value, financial efficiency, and also social value. But to an extent, what we're not seeing is this move together of the social purpose coming through. We're not seeing people really coming together to track the metrics in terms of social delivery as much as we're seeing on the financial side. I think it's been really quite well intentioned, but to an extent, I think what's happened in a lot of our state-owned enterprises is that government has really wanted to drive efficiency and drive in a sense the competitiveness of that organization, and they are tending to bring in quite business as usual thinking management consultants who are not necessarily exploring the space of social metrics and tracking the organization on social metrics as much as the financial ones.
So it's clearly not happening at all levels. What else could be the reason for that?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's time, over time, this could actually develop into this space. But you know, if you look at some of the state-owned enterprises, and we've connected with a number of them, if you talk to the middle managers, the people who are really at the coalface of engaging with people, what we've noticed is almost a desperation in a number of these organizations. They are so desperately wanting to help the poor, to deliver on social issues, to do what they do in a positive way, and they're finding themselves blocked because for a whole number of reasons. And I think, and this is really quite sad to recognize, but some of these state-owned enterprises actually were more geared to delivering social value, although it was for a very small slice of the population. They were more geared to delivering social value during the years of the apartheid regime. And this is to the shame of our revolution. How could this be? How could we have moved away from overtly delivering on social metrics? So I think that's really worrying. At the same time, on the positive side, I think the National Development Plan that was put together, and certainly the diagnostic report that preceded it, really opened the space for shared value. I think people like Trevor Manuel, who really understands this, and I know he's moving on, but hopefully some of that thinking that really led to the development plan and the NDP is going to stay and grow in government, because I think that's really the hope for the future. How business works together with social purpose to activate the commitments and the objectives of the NDP.
Nicola, where do you see the biggest challenge for companies in delivering both profit and purpose?
Well, the theory of it, the idea of bringing together profit and purpose, particularly where your competitive playing field is being impacted by social issues. The theory of it's very simple. That's not the challenge. Getting across that mind shift is actually quite easy, certainly at the level of people who think strategically for your business. But where there is a challenge is turning that into an organization-wide culture. So shared value takes us into a space where we start to question some of our long and dearly held assumptions about business and business as usual and how we create value. It tends to cut across silos that we're very comfortable operating in. It takes us into new territories where perhaps some of our fundamentals are being questioned. And this takes people into a somewhat uncomfortable space. What happens in an organization is there's a very natural resistance to being taken into the space. And that's probably where we find a challenge, is that to get to scale inside an organization, we hit up against a lot of pushback.
Which is presumably a space of organizational change, and it's almost a problem of shedding the curse of the status quo.
Exactly, and I mean, none of us really like change unless it's our idea driving the change, right? So there's a natural process in a system that will tend to throw up resistance to something different to what we're used to, and we'll find this in any organization. So, you know, really what the challenge is for a leader to look at this tension and say, hang on, there's a tension, the organization is uncomfortable, either I want to make that go away, or I look at it through another lens and say there's energy there. There's energy in a tension. If there's energy in tension, what we have is the ability to focus and channel that energy, to drive it into something more innovative, something more creative. And this is a concept that was introduced by Peter Senge actually a couple of decades ago. He's from the Society for Organizational Learning. And what Peter Senge said is, we use a creative tension as a force to drive innovation. So if you're prepared to take your organization into that uncomfortable space, where they're beginning to challenge the fundamentals or assumptions about how they did business, what you have is a creative tension that can feed energy into process changes that drive radical efficiency and radical access. It can feed energy into new products, innovations, accessing new markets, or perhaps into developmental partnerships. And this is the skill a leader needs to have if he or she is going to drive shared value or profit and purpose in an organization.
And generally speaking, Nicola, do you think South African companies have the leadership skills and competencies needed?
Yeah, the answer to that would be yes and no. If you look at the last 20, 30 years in South Africa's history, our business leaders have been through some very interesting times. Let's put it as interesting times, because in those times we can learn a huge amount about what it means to run business and create value in a highly volatile context. So in some respects, South Africa has been getting to grips with volatility, with uncertainty, with complexity, with ambiguity. We've been getting to grips with this VUCA world for many, many years. And there's no surprise that we're actually leading the world in some aspects around integrated reporting, around trying to report in a more robust way. So very positive. On the other side, you know, what we have is a reality, and this is again a bit of an irony, Magno, is where you have a highly performance-driven organization. And what you'll find is there are almost unconscious competencies inside that intense high-performance drive that will tend to limit our creativity in this new uncertain space. So what you again have is an organization where it's drive, 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 performance, performance, performance. And people tend not to want to make mistakes. People tend to be very singular in terms of their focus and not prepared to look at other focuses. And these act almost as a bit of a limiter in respect to the kinds of skills and competencies we need to take us into the shared value space.
And what would the skills and competencies be if you were to coach a shared value leader? Where would you focus, and what would you be trying to ignite?
The skills that a shared value leader are the whole lot of normal skills that a business leader would have and would require to be able to do his or her job effectively. But in addition, what we're picking up is that for the shared value space, you almost need a few what we call micro skills. They're more subtle leadership skills. They're leadership skills that are focused in the area of adaptive capacity, being able to change, being able to work skillfully with change, but also, and equally, the ability to deepen your relationship with whoever you're engaging with. So it could be somebody you're coaching, it could be somebody in your board, it could be a supplier, an investor, an ability to go a little deeper, to listen a little deeper. And very interestingly, when we looked at these skills and competencies over time, we were able to identify that they virtually identical to the kinds of leadership competencies that are taught in indigenous leadership processes. So right here from Southern Africa, a number of these indigenous leadership processes are all about being adaptive, are all about deepening relationship, being able to listen. And as I said, this is on a subtle level where you're starting to work more skillfully with the energy of relationship or the energy of change. So you might have heard of Ubuntu, because that's probably a bit of an overtraded one. I think everyone talks about it all the time. But perhaps what people don't know is that that is actually a skill. It is a micro skill. It's about your conscience, and it is about your ability to put whatever you're doing into that broader space of context, and the ability to make decisions and to move and to identify actions in that space. So Ubuntu is a great example of a micro skill that becomes really important if, as a leader, you're taking your organization into the shared value space.
I agree fully about the Ubuntu, and I'm a firm believer that it is somewhere linked also in our emotional intelligence. What would other examples be of micro skills?
Well, I'll share another one with you. You'll recognize the word, but again, you probably won't know it's a micro skill. The word amandla was certainly a rallying cry for the ANC in the last many decades. And when people said amandla ngawetu, what they were saying was, on one level, on one hand, power to the people. But they were also speaking about a particular kind of skill. So amandla ngawetu actually means, there's an English equivalent, which means all hands on deck. It means come together. It means there's a big job afoot, and we need to work together to make it possible. Now, amandla is your ability as a leader to bring together a number of people, a number of hands, in order to make a difficult job possible. So if you look at the root of the word amandla, it's the same root as izandla, which means your hands, in Zulu and in Xhosa. So we have the ability to take a concept which might be very vague, and in traditional terms, reflect on the micro skill that makes activation of that concept possible in an organization. When you put these things together, and we've got at least 8 micro skills that we work with when we coach leadership in the space, you actually find a deepening of understanding, a deepening of subtlety, and an ability to work with energy and relationship that develops in the leader. It's not for everyone. It's not a skill that everyone feels comfortable learning, but quite powerful and really awesome to deepen your capacity as a leadership provider and as a leader if you're prepared to go there.
So Nicola, on the practical side, if a company wants to start gearing themselves in the shared value space, where do they start?
Yeah, you've probably got a number of people who will listen to this, who are listening to this program, and they will probably all be on the journey already to some extent. And what they'll all tell you is that there's no single space that says, here's the starting point. You might find organizations actually started on their shared value journey because of a major disaster. And a good example there is Nike. They had a huge meltdown in terms of human rights. And that experience in their supply chain really moved them into questioning some of the deep, commonly held assumptions about what does Nike do to create value. So it might be a meltdown. It might be a new product, a new potential market that requires you to change products to deliver to low-income people or people who are difficult to access. It might be a merger and an acquisition where you've got 2 companies coming together, but one has a strong shared value culture. The other one needs to learn and needs to sort of move forward to a changed culture over time with that company. It might literally be a shared value coaching process that you've got running in your organization. I guess the most useful place for an organization, if they haven't formally started or kicked this off, is probably to explore the potential for a shared value strategy within their business. What that does is it makes it a lot more possible for the organization to focus and allocate their resources intelligently going forward. So it's probably the best place, and then we certainly usually follow that up with some kind of coaching intervention, because this is all about being in the mind and getting the mind and the heart together in relation to purpose.
And what, in your experience, would be the critical success factors?
Critical success factors for profit and purpose? Well, probably 3 of them. I would say the first one is evident opportunity. You need to do your homework. Organizations really need to look at their value chains, look at their product spectrums and portfolios. They need to look at their potential partnerships and say, is there a shared value play here? It's really important that shared value is about scale. So this is not about a small little project on the side that sounds good and is cool. It's great to do those, but then use them as strategic enablers to feed into a more competitive scale play over time. So the first really critical success factor is evident opportunity. I think the second one would be political will. And when I say that, I mean in your executive. So if your executive isn't standing behind you fully on the story, I think don't waste your time. You need to get that sense of drive, and there needs to be a sense of common purpose, and it needs to come from the people who allocate resources and make strategic decisions of the company. And probably the third one would be timing, getting the timing right. And this is absolutely crucial, and it's really critical to your success. And you can look at a boxing match, and you might have a great right hook. But if you're in a boxing match and you put that right hook in at the wrong time, well, you've missed. It hasn't worked. And in fact, you've probably opened yourself and exposed yourself to some kind of counterpunch from your opponent. So, like any strategy, like any competitive play, what you've got to do is you've got to get the timing right and understand the context and the forces, the competitive forces that enable you to do that. Otherwise, you're going to be wasting your time.
So profit and purpose obviously needs a little patience too.
Yeah, I think patience is a hugely valuable skill, maybe another micro skill, and it's, you know, we've actually waited around for some organizations. We've been, you know, we work with the organization, but in terms of delivering shared value, we've waited 5, 6, 7 years for some of them to really come to the point where the timing is ready for a scaled, competitive play in relation to shared value. And I think that's just how it goes. You know, you do it too early, you're going to waste your time, and you're going to waste your company's resources. So patience, absolutely critical.
And with Insight, where are you moving in this space?
Well, we've been around in the space for about 10 years. I think probably at the beginning of our organization, we were probably a little bit ahead of the market in terms of this thinking. So it was quite difficult to get some traction, and we tended to be swimming against the tide in terms of how people understood sustainability and how people understood value. But I would say in the last 3 or 4 years, that's turned around quite significantly. So in the last while, we've probably worked with about 40 or more companies on the JSE Top 100. So what I'll say is that there's a lot more traction in the space than there was when we started. And where are we heading? I think we're heading up north. I mean, I think there's huge opportunity all the way through Africa. I think it's incredibly exciting. So our sights are on emerging markets more generally, but also, Magna, into the private equity market. We've worked primarily with listed corporates. I think there's a huge opportunity and an exciting space for private equity companies who don't necessarily have a board of investors or shareholders that are going to sort of be overly cautious and who perhaps are not as aware of the exciting competitive developments at the coalface of social value. So I think that's really where we'll be headed. And also, we've just become a member of the Shared Value Initiative, which was started by Michael Porter and Mark Kramer a year or so ago. And so we're really looking forward to bringing some African and South African examples into the global shared value network.
So, Nicola, I hear there are some exciting prospects ahead.
Magna, I think the space is hugely exciting. I really believe that shared value is in Africa's DNA. I think we've just been held back for, after about a few centuries of colonial rule, we've been held back by a few decades of post-colonial cronyism, if you like. But if we can get over that, and I think we can, I really believe that shared value or purpose and profit is going to be the basis of Africa's renaissance.
Nicola, thank you so much for sharing and your visions and your aspirations, and all the best with those. And we're looking forward to getting closer engaged on the Proudly for Purpose platform to take purpose-driven leadership to new heights. Thank you so much.
Magna, thank you so much. My absolute pleasure. I look forward to staying connected.
Thank you very much, Nicola and Magna, for hosting a conversation on a very exciting topic. I'm reminded of Simon Sinek's book and TED Talk, Start with Why. And when you mentioned the Oceania example, that brought it home beautifully. Simon Sinek says that most companies can tell you what they do, a few companies can tell you how they do it, and even fewer companies can tell you why they do it. And so Oceania start with why, by saying the reason we're doing what we do is because we're taking affordable nutrition into deepest, darkest Africa, who wouldn't otherwise have access to nutritious food like this. And I love the other examples that you gave as well. So, and I agree with you, Africa is definitely going to be the start of this renaissance. So thank you very much, Magna and Nicola. That wraps up this session, and we look forward to seeing you in the next Proudly for Purpose Tele Summit.